Hey, it's 1867. Come on now, load up in that wagon, sit up there in that seat with me, because we're going down the same trail. We're going to talk about old Cookie on that Chisholm Trail and what he stocked that wagon with and how he got by. But folks, how we do it today. What has stayed the same? What has changed? What about feeding cowboys and stocking wagons and going down that dusty trail? Thank y'all for stopping by camp today. And what are we talking about? Stepping back in history a long time ago to that first Meals on Wheels. So really we're talking about the cattle drive era, and that was really after the Civil War, the greatest expansion and migratory event that ever happened in the United States. Four-legged bovine beasts that started in South Texas and went to Abilene, Kansas, and even trails even further than that. 1.5 million head over that little short four-span years there. On the Chisholm Trail especially, they would go into San Antonio and buy major supplies there. It's really what goes down Highway 81 through Oklahoma right there. Now when he come off the Texas side and cross that river and come up, there's a little place called Terrell, Texas now. Used to be the old Fleetwood store there. But then old Cookie would take that wagon, he'd go into town, get everything he needed to restock again and go the rest of the way. 3 to 4 months going down that trail. When you get to the Red River, we're looking at a little between 1/3 and 1/2 of a way to Abilene, Kansas. After they'd crossed the river there at the Red, and they'd restocked that wagon, and you're heading straight on up, making 12 to 14 miles a day. But folks, he was going to stock enough to get him to there to get to the railhead in Abilene, Kansas. And I'll tell you, there's one thing you know old Cookie had. That was some sourdough starter. Now, he's making biscuits out of that sourdough starter, or he's making pancakes of a morning. Sometimes there might be a little salt pork, but I guarantee you beans and coffee was accompanying every meal that they had. But at supper time, build him a fire and go to making pie. They called him a dough puncher, and man, he was punching that dough out, because that dried fruit, folks, when you take it, you have to rehydrate that stuff before you could use it. Now, when you go talking about the meat that he took, a lot of it was just salt pork. But there was some dried jerky meat that went along, or if somebody got a chance to shoot a deer coming down the trail, that was there too. But also if there was, say there was an old steer broke a leg on the trail, and this happened, drag him up to camp, go to cutting your hindquarters off of him. As Cookie would put that meat in the wagon to haul it down there, that black pepper gonna keep the flies off of it, and that salt will sort of keep it cured out to where he can get it used up before he gets there. Turkey come through camp, old Cookie wouldn't mind shooting that thing. There was a lot of rattlesnake. Now I'm sure old Cookie chopped the head off of many of them coming in there. That stuff didn't go to waste. You hang 6 or 7 up there, go to skinning, you could have a little rattlesnake chili, you could have a rattlesnake in a little bit of the beans. They didn't waste nothing. If Cookie had something that he's thinking, oh man, I need to keep that as cool as possible, there is a water barrel on the other side of that wagon. And a lot of times, old Cookie would tie a string around something and he could just hang it right down in there in that cool water. It would keep it. That was the only refrigeration that he had going down the trail. There wasn't no ice chests, none of that. But a lot of it he would stock in the chuck box that he could, that he's going to use readily, that he wouldn't have to crawl back and forth in and out of the wagon. But all them wagons had a boot underneath. Most of the time that's where he had his cooking utensils. But let's start up there at the front of the wagon. There was usually a wagon box up there set on the front, and it was stakes like to anchor that fly down, because when he pulled that wagon sheet off there, he tied it to them bolsters on the back, drug it off out there, set 2 posts, staked it down with rope. So he had him some tent stakes up there, he had him some extra rope, he had him some leather. Cookie had a whole lot more stuff that he had to take with him too. There's shovels, there's axes. I know he's got an old gun, a big old sledgehammer, a mallet that he would use to drive them stakes in, but then he'd have like an old wagon wheel jack. If we're gonna have to change a wheel on that wagon, or if we're gonna have to grease them wheels before we get there, periodic maintenance, folks, there was a little bucket to sit right under that wagon under the water barrel side. You'd see it flopping going down the trail, full of axle grease, or what they call bear grease. That's what he'd pack them wheels with when he could grease them every time. Their bedrolls wasn't like we have. It was just usually a tarp, maybe a little old wool blanket, and that's about it. Did he carry the other cowboys' bedrolls? No, because folks, we're just talking about something that's this big around, tied on behind the saddle. That's all there was. But let's talk about cooking tools that he took along with him. Now, I'm sure there was at least 2 coffee pots. because everybody gonna carry two. You gotta have them so if one's running out, you got another one started. If we get to talking about Dutch ovens, now, if old Cookie's got a couple of them 16s and maybe a 14, he's in pretty good shape. But also, he's got some cast iron skillets that he's got thrown in there to go with that. Old coal oil lanterns. Now, he'd probably have 4 most of the time, probably taking him some kerosene to go along with him, and then folks, something that he's got hid underneath that wagon somewhere in a bedroll tarp, something. Cookie's got a little medicinal whiskey stuck back in there somewhere that he's got to have. There's usually a 35 to 40 gallon water barrel that old Cookie was going to fill up every time he crossed a river or come by a water hole if he was running short. A lot of them had what we called a possum belly. Now, a possum is a marsupial animal, if y'all didn't know, carries stuff in a pouch. That's his youngins. Now, a possum belly on a wagon was usually either a buffalo hide or an old longhorn hide, or maybe even a mule deer that had been stretched out under there, dried to where it was just underneath, it had a belly under it. You get in some of that country and you went a long ways, there ain't much firewood. So when you're going along through there and old Cookie thinks, there's a little old pile of wood, throw that stuff under there. But folks, when they wasn't wood, what'd they burn? Buffalo chips, cow chips, all them supplies, all that food. You're running out of room pretty quick. Now on some of them longer trips, it wasn't uncommon for you to have what they called a hood wagon or a hoodlum wagon. It would just be a buckboard wagon that went along with them that they could carry more supplies in that was tarped down. Usually somebody that was helping the cook, he'd be sitting back there driving it. And on occasion you might see a pup wagon. It's a little bitty, really a narrow box that would slip on just like a trailer hitch right there at the back of the wagon. And some of them old cooks was lucky enough that they had just a little old 2-eye stove in that thing that when they got to where they was at, they could just dump that thing out of there, build a fire. You talk about doing some pie baking and he'd have him a flat surface that he could cook on. You didn't see it often, but you did see it some. Now folks, I think we ought to mention in our new book, Comfort Food the Cowboy Way, there is a pretty good detailed description of what Cookie took down the trail, and it's listed out as what we took down the trail. So when we talk about his times versus how we stock a wagon when we're gonna go to a ranch, whether it be 2 weeks or 6 weeks, some of it has changed, some of it stays the same. But we're feeding a crew pretty similar to what Cookie had when he was going down the trail, and that's 12 to 15 people. The biggest thing, folks, that has changed from Cookie's time to my time is the quality of the food and also the quantity. We make the menu for 3 meals a day. But also, then we make a grocery list and we go back through there and we check it to make sure we have everything. Now, if it's a long stay at a ranch, we send that grocery list to headquarters. Ranch wives, they go to town. They get all the groceries, they put it in a place there on the ranch at headquarters to where we can stock up week by week whenever we need it. Cold storage for us, hey, we're really blessed. We can keep something in a Yeti ice chest for a long time out there, or get somebody to bring us ice. Because we'd have different ice chests sorted out to where this is the meat. We had another one that was all dairy. We'd have grated cheese, sour cream, milk, buttermilk. But folks, one thing that I always had too was a canned milk, because canned milk will outlast anything you got, and it's always something that you need because you're going to run out of that other if something happens. You know, the staples on the wagon are pretty much the same as old Cookie had. I'm gonna have coffee, I'm gonna have flour, I'm gonna have sugar, and I'm gonna have spices that was really traditional to his time too. Cinnamon, vanilla, nutmeg, good coarse ground black pepper, something like that, some dried chilies. Later on as you got down the trail, maybe even up into the late 1890s, early 1900s, there's come a thing along down the trail called a canned good. Now, we could take big old cans, them number 12 cans of fruit, peaches, apricots, apples. We didn't have to worry about dried fruit and rehydrate it like Cookie did. There's a luxury too that we had that I think, Cookie, he didn't have much of it. He might have had some at the start, but that's butter, folks. Veggies. Now, if Cookie and them had a veggie, he might be able to go around through them and say, whoa, hold up. I'm gonna pull me up some of them wild onions. Them things be really good. Maybe a little bit of that poke there he could just pull off, make a poke salad, have some of them greens. There's a lot of stuff that growed wild back then that we don't get to see as much today. Now, we do take fresh produce in when we go to a ranch, but folks, that stuff has to be used up usually in the first week to 10 days. I'd usually have 2 bedrolls in ours most of the time, mine and Shannon's. That's what we'd be sitting in there rolled up. Big old nice foam pad, I'm talking about like this, folks. Sheets on top of that, wool blanket and some pillow. Cookie and them would have thought they was at the Hyatt Regency if they'd have got something like that. Now he had a crosscut saw. Now most of the time I ever been on a wagon that I ever stayed any length of time on a ranch, you know what I had? Cookie would have loved that thing, but folks, we still got that sledgehammer in there. I'm usually gonna have a sharp pointed shovel and then a shovel that we cook with for our Dutch ovens. Now, most time we'll throw that old 12 gauge shotgun in there or maybe that old 30-30 rifle to where we're gonna have us some means of protection. I'm not talking about from somebody running up trying to get us, I'm talking about some hogs in camp. Really, we got the same water barrel as old Cookie does coming down the trail. Me and Shan don't use a possum belly on our wagon because when we go to a camp, they usually got that thing supplied with enough wood that we don't have to worry about cutting any wood. But folks, also in that wagon a lot of times is our house. Now, that is usually a 9x9 or a 10x10 teepee. It's got 2 poles that just set it up just like that on a triangle. There's a cot in there sometimes. We're in good shape. Let me tell you that something that hasn't changed, and that's the mechanism in which we went down the trail in this old chuck wagon. They may have been more numerous back in Cookie's times, but there's still some out there, and this one functions just like his did. All cooks are going to arrange a chuck wagon as how they see fit, how they want it. This one is the one that me and Shan designed, and if you want to go back and check out that video of restoring this old wagon, you can be sure and find that part 1 and part 2. But you look in there and you look on the side there, 2 coffee pots just like old Cookie. We got mixing bowls, we got rolling pins. Up here in this one up here, there is enough silverware to feed 12 cowboys. But we got utensils to cook with, cup towels, drying towels, all kinds of seasoning in there. We get back in here, there is some big old canisters in here that hold flour and sugar. Always a crock jar, folks, dishwashing soap. When we talked about the fly that Cookie had, which is really just the wagon sheet, and what I'm talking about that, it's what covered the bows that he could pull all the way from the front to the back, and then he would just pull the whole thing off out here, leave it tied to the bolsters on the side, and that was it. Now the fly that we have today is a whole lot bigger, folks. It's 18 by 24. It has snap-in walls that go all the way around if we need to when it's really cold. Them big flies like that, they do catch a lot of wind, they do. Now I can remember when me and Shannon was in Wyoming, one of the nicest days I ever remember in Wyoming weather it was, till right after supper. And then I mean, here it come, folks. 70, 80 mile an hour straight line winds, no storm, sun was still shining just like it was. It ripped that fly to shreds, it did. I mean, it tore it up in a matter of seconds and it was gone. I would take that old big fly, and when you get it laid out there, on one side there, when you look up there at the top, there's a big old place for a stovepipe to go through. And what does that stovepipe hook up to? That wonderful warming contraption in the wintertime that we call Bertha. Well, unless old Cookie had one of them pup wagons that he dumped one of them little pup stoves out of, he didn't have no Bertha. And folks, for years and years, I did the same thing old Cookie did. I'd get out there and we'd set up camp. I'd take me a shovel and I'd dig me a fire pit. And I'd mount it up around the sides. Then you'd lay a grate over the top, and that's how you'd cook. Old Cookie did the same thing. Now, you'll see maybe in some videos that you've seen in some ranches that we were on, that we had more of a portable, collapsible kind of stove that we could set up out there. And it kept you from having to dig a hole every day, but still that fire was contained. Well, we sure thank you for stopping by camp. We enjoyed it. You know, folks, not only is this history, this is living history. There's people still out there doing this. There's people that still have ranches that are remote and rugged, that they need a cook and they need somebody to pull a wagon, or they need to be somebody in a camp that's cooking for cowboys. I commend all them old cooks that lit the way. If we're talking about wagons, I think there's an event that you might want to go to. That's in Lebanon, Missouri, over Memorial Day weekend on that Saturday. And you can see sometimes as many as 35 to 40 wagons, all of them with a different setup, different paint job. So we'd be asking you to be sure and check that events page on our website. There's a listing for it there. But it is with pride, honor, and privilege that I tip my hat to all our servicemen and women and all those veterans who have kept that old flag flying over camp. To all them old cooks, hey, thank you so much. I'll see you one day in heaven and we'll punch us some dough together. Rest of you, come on in here. Let me give you a big old hug from an old wagon cook, a dough puncher. God bless you, each and every one, and I hope you like a little history about Wagon.